Hello, everyone. Welcome back to For the Girls. We're so excited to recap the Emilia Romagna GP from Imola this weekend, which started out as not the biggest thriller, but then had an absolutely incredible last 10 laps. We're so excited to get into it and also give a bit of a preview for Monaco next weekend. I'm Sarah.
I'm Tiggy.
And I'm Chessa. So let's start with our overall thoughts and takeaways for the weekend. I think for me, like I said in the preview, I've quite literally never been more excited to watch a race than for this weekend. So you
just loved this weekend so much.
You best believe I went to bed last night like a child on Christmas Eve and woke up like so excited. Like I literally didn't even get out of bed to like get my coffee or anything. I was like locked and loaded. As soon as I woke up, I was very, very excited. And, the race did not disappoint. Like you said, Sarah, maybe it wasn't super exciting at the beginning, but with it being truly such a narrow track, like some of the views, camera angles, you could see just how narrow it was. It ended up being great racing, great passing, especially sort of like, at the end, of course, there was great racing, but throughout like the back half of the grid, it was really exciting. And then my other key highlight from the weekend, which I'm sure you guys will also mention at some point, is the sort of like tribute lap that Vettel did in Senna's old 1993 McLaren. It was so beautiful. This was the 30-year anniversary of the fatalities of both Senna and Ratzenberger at the circuit. And so it was just very emotional. Vettel's dad was even crying, and it just was a very beautiful tribute. So that was also a highlight.
Yeah, we absolutely love Seb. So cool that he did that. And yeah, it was very emotional, as Chessa said. For me, someone DM'd us, I think, saying this race was so long and then it just ended in a split second, which is exactly how it felt. Like it felt at the beginning very long and, kind of processional almost in a way, with Max pulling away. And then at the end, the last 10 laps, I was like, I didn't want it to end. I was screaming at the TV, which was so fun. But yeah, I agree, Chessa, with the track situation. I think it's such a punishing track if you go even slightly wide, which is always fun because it keeps drivers on their toes. Like even
and they
Max
moved the gravel in too to make it even harder.
Even Max was saying how much he loved that, and tons of drivers were taking little trips into the gravel and having their moments, and so many cars were catching air. I was like trying to look under the floor, but it was like the number of cars that were catching air was crazy. I don't know how many people watched on F1 TV, but Sarah, I don't know, you watch on F1 TV. Did you see the new graphics with the the drivers' three-letter codes?
I watch on ESPN.
On top. So as the cars are going around the circuit, they have these little floating descriptors of like who is driving, which I think is really smart because sometimes when you're just watching, you don't know if you see a McLaren, is it Lando, is it Piastri? It's really hard to see the numbers. So I thought that was really cool that they were doing that. The battle at the end really made the race for me, and the testy radio messages were insane. Like both Lando and Max, if I were their race engineer, I would not want to be even risking my life to go on that and press that button.
TV, it was either Jolyon Palmer or David Coulthard joked in the last 3 laps of like, either of their race engineers will speak at their own peril right now.
Yeah, literally.
For me, I think the race put out the funniest graphic, which I think summed up my thoughts on the race. It was basically people just sitting stone-faced, looking bored. It was first 53 laps, and last 10 laps just so exciting. It was thrilling to get to see McLaren actually compete with Red Bull on pure pace.
Yeah.
Lando and McLaren obviously looked amazing in Miami, but there still was a really big assist from the safety car. He would not have been able to win without the safety car, which is a big part. Getting lucky with strategy is a huge part of getting results, but it was amazing getting to see just flat out pure pace and racecraft between the two of them. And Lando is, compared to Max, so much less experienced at needing to be pushing flat out at the front for a win. And Lando was pushing so hard, could have lost the car so many times, hitting the gravel every single time, out of breath on the radio, and his driving and delivery under pressure was incredible.
He was throwing that car all over the place. I was like, how is this car staying on track? How is it not doing flips in the air?
I have so many thoughts about that, so we'll talk about that later.
It was just amazing. And then also such a great reminder of even Max seemed like he had the most fun weekend he's had in like 2 years. Of course.
Because of his 24-hour sim race that he was doing right up till the actual race.
He was having a blast, and him having to work for it, having to race, having to push to the limit. You can tell that it meant so much to him, getting pole and getting the win. And overall, I think it was just an example of F1 and the modern cars at their best. And I really hope we get to see that more.
Yeah, hearing his radio after quali, I was like, I have not heard Max that elated in so long. He's usually like, I think it was David Coulthard or someone was saying like, oh, that's not the simply lovely we're used to from Max. It was like,
That's exactly right.
quite emotional and actually extremely pleased. So let's jump into our MVPs. For me, I'm going to give it to the entire team of McLaren. Obviously, Lando, incredible. We talked about his pure pace versus Max and just how much he attacked that. And seeing in the final 10 laps, seconds tick down every lap was one of the most thrilling feelings I've had.
The margins he was making up per lap were insanity.
It's insane.
Wild.
Yeah. So crazy. But also Oscar, I think we really have to give it to him.
Yes.
Had he not had that penalty, I really do think he outqualified Lando. I think we would have seen Piastri in Lando's position potentially, and potentially even beating Max. So it's such a bummer that happened, but the penalty was of his own, well, at least of the team's own doing. But just amazing to see McLaren continue to deliver and just, yeah, like Sarah was saying, battle Max in the Red Bull on pure pace and kind of go toe to toe. Incredible. Never thought I would see this season. So kudos.
Yeah, it was amazing. I figured someone would obviously say Lando. So I think I'm a combination of Oscar and Max. It was so heartbreaking for Oscar. I completely agree with everything Tiki said. I feel like he's gotten some really unlucky breaks at these big moments, but he's so mature and patient and gracious about it. And I think he knows that his moment is coming. And I'm so excited for when we get to see that, because I think we're seeing the past 2 weekends what the McLaren car and team is capable of right now. So I'm really excited for Oscar to have his moment to shine. And then Max and I guess the Red Bull team overall, I think Tiki and I were joking about kind of sandbagging of when Max in practice on Friday is like, oh, the car's horrible. The car doesn't work at all. And then gets pole and wins the race.
Sarah's like, he's not sandbagging. He's not sandbagging. And then literally when he gets pole, I just responded to that message of Sarah's and I was just like, LOL.
Thumbs up. I will say though, I do think obviously their standards are different because their idea of having a quote unquote bad car is going to be like P3. But I do think it's a good example of the team not being super happy with the setup. We saw Checo really struggling all weekend. We haven't talked about Checo at all. And Red Bull, Max was saying needing to make changes right up until the Parc Fermé rules kicked in. So it really seemed like it was kind of a scramble on Friday night, Saturday morning to get the car together, and they really pulled it off clearly. And then Max just having to really drive for it and having to dig deep for performance, which we haven't seen from him for a while. It was just so fun getting to see him actually
for sure
race on the limit.
Red Bull really does deserve a lot of credit for, I feel like, multiple times being able to turn a car around overnight from practice to quali in a way that we don't see any other team doing, I feel like.
Totally.
So I heard a stat. They spent 11 hours, I guess, Saturday night at Milton Keynes back at their headquarters running simulations. Like they put in so much work to turn that car around. And never thought you would hear the day, but Max is my MVP from this weekend.
Whoa. Have you ever? I don't think you've ever.
Oh, of course not. I've literally never said that in my life.
Say more. Say more.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking, I was like, oh, maybe like a fun little MVP would be Alpine making it to Q2 and like the level of elation in the garage. That was just like a cheeky MVP, but my true MVP. Yeah, I mean, it's freaking amazing to see Max work for it and feel happy and confident and proud that he had to work for it, because that's like when you get an F1 win and you talk to the F1 winner or you hear from the race winner, you want them to feel happy and proud and like they worked for their win. And we haven't gotten that from Max for years. So to finally be getting this, of course, he's my MVP. It's amazing. This is what it's all about. Obviously. Okay, moving on. LVPs, guys, ladies.
I think I have to unfortunately go with Williams, which is really unfortunate because they did start the season out so strong, and I hate like Alex Albon DNF'd, and Logan did have a couple good passes, so kudos to him for doing what he did a little bit with that car. But yeah, just not seeing the trajectory we wanted to see from them. And it is unfortunate off the back of Alex Albon signing a multi-year deal with them and just not seeing the performance or the result. And then obviously we had Chassis Gate happen, and I feel like it's been on the downhill since then, which is a bummer, which it's understandable.
That's
but I just, I wish we were seeing more from them.
On the opposite end of the coin, who am I today? My LVP is Checo.
Fair.
I was just disappointed that he couldn't start top 10. He obviously got a few points back, and I get it. The car was just not working with them this weekend, but of course Max was able to pull it out of the hat and make it work. And I just was disappointed in Checo.
I really hope this is not the point of the season where we have seen with Checo in the past, where it's like kind of the beginning of the end, where he starts really strong and then tapers off. So I hope this is just one unfortunate weekend and it's still up from here. I mean, he loves street circuits, so Monaco will be a good one next.
I know that's tough. It feels so
Sarah,
much
what?
like repeating history. What?
It's the beginning of the end for Checo. You're agreeing? You're cementing that?
No, I'm just saying it feels ominous that this is year 3 of coming so strong out of the gate, and then things start happening, like not consistently making Q3 in a Red Bull, which is insane. So I hope that is not. I really hope that is not the start of this.
Is that your LVP as well?
No, I think probably for me, Alfa Romeo, Steak, Sauber, sorry.
The 0 pointers.
Steak, Sauber, Alfa Romeo, Audi, which one?
It's just tough. It was looking back on kind of some of Bottas's performances over the years, even at this circuit. I really keep wishing that they'll have kind of a breakthrough weekend, and it just keeps not happening. Yeah. And Alpine will kind of have these steps forward, like getting a Q2 or just a kind of real positivity to look for, and just points for Kick, Steak, Sauber I'm really, really hoping for at some point for Bottas.
I'm really hoping for Joe as well. It's such a bummer. I feel like Joe is pretty talented, and I am nervous about his seat security just in F1 in general. And I
totally
would be sad to see him go. For how our hot takes held up, I said a Charles win, and I was feeling really good about it on Friday. I was feeling pretty good.
Interesting.
Ferrari had amazing practices.
But practice is not going to get you a hot take winning.
Well, I don't mean like I thought my hot take was in the bag. I was just saying like they were doing pretty well. I was like, maybe they could really challenge.
They
Max
did look.
And Red Bull, they were looking good. So unfortunate. At least we got a podium, but no win.
I was pretty close on my hot takes. I had McLaren and Mercedes in the top 5. Instead, I got both McLarens in the top 5 and then Mercedes 6, 7. So that's okay.
I have a beef with that being a hot take.
Okay. It didn't come through, so it was clearly
That's
hot
true.
enough.
That's true.
Getting into some practice and quali highlights. FP1, we had Charles looking strong in the Ferrari, while the Red Bulls seemed to struggle on balance and grip, as we were saying, with their practice struggles. And we had the now famous reserve driver, Ollie Berman, competing in the first of his 6 scheduled FP1 runs in 2024 in K-Mag's Haas.
6 is a lot.
Yeah. It's a ton. Yeah. I think he's
and he's also in F2, F3.
He's really
F2.
being positioned for a seat next year, I think.
Yeah, he's
totally
busy.
For FP2, pretty mixed showing with Yuki and the V-Carb looking strong, a bit of foreshadowing there. No Red Bulls in the top 5. And then in FP3, we had 2 red flags in the hour with both Alonso and Checo heading into the barriers, kind of an example of practice showing when things might not go so hot for particular drivers. And then topping the timesheets, though, we had Oscar, Lando, both Ferraris, Carlos and Charles, and George. So after the practices, Chessa was so excited after these practices, and we asked for some hot takes. It did not disappoint. A lot of Max Red Bull DNFs, Lando and Oscar podiums and wins. So good prediction on that. A Yuki podium wildcard. That was a great one. And of course, lots about Ferrari and the Tifosi. We haven't talked about this yet, but the crowd looked unbelievable. It was Dutch style with the flares, the red flares everywhere.
Yeah. And then they stormed the track.
Stunning weather all weekend. It just looked absolutely gorgeous to be at that race.
People deserved that after last year. It was an amazing vibes, it seemed.
I was loving the Yuki hype because Yuki lives in Italy, and he had done he'd done well in practice, and he did pretty well in quali. And they were talking about how, he's driven more laps around the Imola circuit probably than any other circuit out there. And David Coulthard, I think it was David Coulthard, said, "Pasta makes you fasta."
I forgot to say, for Oscar's MVP, he had never driven at this track before.
Yes.
Also insane.
Absolutely crazy.
Good for him.
So
also,
cool.
If Hulkenberg hadn't given Max a toe in quali, Piastri's time was the fastest. So
Yeah.
It's also a really
putting that
punishing,
out there.
difficult track to do that well at, having no experience there. So
Yes.
even more.
So speaking of quali and times, let's jump into it. So it was a pretty windy day. So interesting curveball always there for drivers to have yet another thing to think about when it comes to getting the ways around the circuit. For Q1, Hulkenberg was looking really strong. The commentators continued calling him Mr. Saturday, which I love. And there's some funny memes out there. Look those up. Other news, we had both Alpines into Q2 again, which was like a huge celebration moment for the team. And then unfortunately, we did have that moment, which ended up getting Oscar a grid place penalty, but he impeded K-Mag's flying lap because it seemed like maybe his engineer or someone on the team didn't make him aware that that flying lap was happened. So unfortunately, he did get that 3-place grid penalty. But the biggest topic of conversation, at least in my opinion, was Alonso. So he had a moment kind of like making a mistake and spinning out into the gravel. And then he just had a random issue with the car. So they had to box him in Q1. He dropped out of quality there and ended up in P19. It would have been P20, but Sargent's lap time ended up getting deleted for his. So he was out. So out we had Bottas, Sargent, Joe, Magnussen, and Alonso.
For Q2, so lots of last-minute lap times getting set, and in a big shocker, Checo, as we were saying, could not get in a strong enough lap to make it out of Q2, which is crazy. Big surprise there. So we had Checo, Ocon, Stroll, Albon, and Gasly knocked out. Then for Q3, Max ended up pulling it out of the bag, set the fastest lap that no one could beat. Oscar, like we were saying, looked so strong, only 0.074 seconds back from Max. He actually had the fastest lap time, like Chessa was saying, if you consider the toe that Max got from Hulkenberg. We saw Lando in P3, followed by Charles Leclerc and Sainz in 4th and 5th. And then to round out the top 10, we had George, Yuki, Lewis, Danny, and Nico. But good for the V-Carbs getting in top 10 there.
For overall highlights for the race, it was awesome. Our expectations were kind of somewhat low, except for Chessa, since this race doesn't usually see that much by way of passing. It's usually a one-stopper, but lots to discuss here. So it's usually a one-stop race, but Pirelli brought their softest 3-tire compound. Since there's 5 tire compounds available, Pirelli picks 3 for each race to try to get the teams to make it more than a one-stopper. Something to keep in mind is that this track and race is one of the largest pit stop time losses on the calendar. So there's kind of a lot of inertia to keeping it a one-stopper. The start was fast for everyone up at the top, and despite everyone running pretty close to each other, the top 6 fell right into line based on their starting positions. It was an extremely clean start and first few laps, and the top 6 just stayed the same. Further back on the grid, Lewis and Checo each made up a position while Yuki fell back 2 spots. But besides that, there wasn't anything really crazy at the start.
So some main highlights overall in the race. Of course, Max led the race the entire way, but Lando had amazing pressure on him, that late race charge, which of course we'll continue to talk about. Another big notable thing was the lonely race that the Mercedes drivers had. They kind of just like hung out P6 and P7 the whole time. And then there was a huge DRS train behind Hulkenberg in P8. And we have a lot of new people here. So I thought I would just do a little refresher on what a DRS train is. Basically when a bunch of cars get behind a leader. In this case, it was Hulkenberg in P8. And they're all kind of like lined up within DRS range of each other. So what happens is if you have DRS on the car in front of you, it doesn't really help if that car also already has DRS. So like the benefits go away there. So there was a bit of a DRS train at the back, but we still saw some fun action. And then another big highlight, which we'll talk about, was Albon's pretty tough weekend. And our radio of the week, we chose a Max one, which was really fun. I had to work hard for that one. So very happy about that.
4 teams, Red Bull. Speaking of which, it was a competitive race for Max. He had multiple high notes this weekend. He matched Senna's 8 consecutive pole record, and he also announced that his sim team, like we were saying, won the virtual Nürburgring 24-hour race. So that was cool.
They had to fit they had to like redo his motorhome to fit a new sim in there.
Yeah.
Insane.
Footage is hilarious. Like in this motorhome and then like getting out into the car. But good for him. And then after struggling with the car over the weekend, his race definitely showed how good he is on talent. Even with the car practically working against him, he remained composed. He held the lead the entire race, even though definitely sweating a bit with Lando's pressure. But it was kind of crazy especially at the end with his battery basically on empty. That was wild. but he managed to hang on. F1 posted a stat that Max's start to win ratio is now 30.7%, which just edges out Hamilton's at 30.4. So another
That's like
record.
1 and 3.
Ridiculous.
So high.
Crazy.
Some drivers are literally over hundreds.
And while Checo was able to make up a few positions to go from P11 to P8, it definitely was not the race he was hoping for. He made a mistake in the middle of the race, had a bit of a gravel trip, lost at least 5 seconds. You could tell even when people in kind of the P6 to P8 range were trying to overtake after pit stops, he wasn't even defending that hard, knowing it wasn't really his race. But after the race, Horner acknowledged the increasing levels of competition facing Red Bull, which is interesting, saying McLaren have made a step, Ferrari have made a step. We're going to keep that level of development coming.
And as a reminder, Red Bull has the least amount of wind tunnel time. So it's definitely a factor as we get into the development race.
So true.
Speaking of Red Bull too, did you guys see that it was Zach Brown and someone else and Toto? They were talking about the number of CVs flying around from Red Bull. Like people are leaving.
They were saying that
supposedly
Adrian Newey is the first domino to fall, but only the first, and that we might see more coming. I think things are going to switch up a lot, not just because of everything going on more broadly, but I think with the 2026 regulations, like any huge regulation change, teams are jockeying for positions, team engineers and people at the factory want to work for the team that they think is going to do best. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a change up.
I can't wait. So like we talked about, Ferrari, they had really strong race pace. Of course, they were wishing to have been a little bit more competitive at quali, given how important that was for the race. But great job for Charles on podium. This is their first podium at Imola since Schumacher in 2006. So Tifosi are happy.
Crazy.
Ferrari's definitely very happy from that. And for Sainz, bummer that he couldn't also make it on podium, and he lost one grid position. He started P4 and ended P5, but I think pretty consistent race, and they should be happy with that too.
For Mercedes, it was a pretty uneventful and lonely race for Lewis and George. A good example of why quality is so important, since most of the action here happened within the top 5 and the bottom half of the grid. They were hanging out in that kind of midfield dead zone. They picked up some points, managed to get some data on their latest upgrades that hopefully will help them in Monaco. And George did have a last-minute pit stop to snag fastest laps. That was fun. And given that it wasn't that great of a weekend, Lewis sounded pretty positive about the car and development. So that was a good sign.
Yeah, and I also feel like he was probably feeling the love in Italy given his pending move next year.
So true.
Which is, for McLaren, so exciting for them. Their pace is just truly astonishing, and the upgrades are definitely working. It's so fun to see the team and how happy they are. Lando spent the entire race chasing Max, and to his credit, Max just never got away with the 10, 15, 20 plus second gap he's usually able to build. So it's a bit of a bummer. I think Lando was even more frustrated having been that close, but if McLaren had thought even a few weeks ago, like you would be finishing basically 0.7 seconds behind Max Verstappen in a race on pure pace, like they would be pinching themselves. So I think the biggest question, which we'll never know, but had Lando had just 1 or 2 more laps, do you think he could have done it?
I think he could have.
I think so too.
I think maybe at any other circuit, but it's so hard to pass here. So I don't know, but I would say more yes than no in my camp. But I mean, he drove super well, and like we said at the beginning, he was really pushing the car all out, and there was a few moments where he seemed he might have lost it, maybe had made some mistakes, but just to be able to have that practice of chasing the race leader and having all of that pressure, like one in Miami having to lead the race for kind of a long time out at the front, like not wanting to make a mistake, and then this time just like pushing flat out. It's such good practice for him, so it's only a matter of time before he just starts to rack up the race wins.
Totally. The floodgates are open. Once you get that first win, you rip the Band-Aid off.
For Aston Martin, it was a tough weekend for Alonso. Just his track conditions were looking good for him to set a quali lap. He was called into the pits due to a problem with his car in Q1. So we had to start from the pit lane due to some suspension changes. Tough race overall. He finished last of the cars that finished in P19. His brakes caught on fire at one point coming out of a pit stop. Tough. On the other hand, interestingly, Stroll had a pretty good weekend. He was able to salvage a bit of the weekend going from P13 start to snagging points in P9. He had some strong, pretty good overtakes. So bit of a role reversal at Aston this weekend.
It was his 150th Grand Prix start. So
Nice.
150th time is the charm.
0 for fun 150.
No, Stroll's won a race.
Oh, really? Wait, we can
Yeah,
take
a couple
where?
like pre-COVID or during COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
I think it was
race
Force
winner.
India days. Yeah.
Lance Stroll, race winner.
For VCAR, we had Yuki in the points. Super exciting for him. He did not get a podium. Shout out to all of you who had predicted that.
We haven't mentioned yet for Danny Ricciardo either, knocking Checo out of Q3.
Yep.
So
highlight of the season so far.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Unfortunately, it didn't really translate into much during the race. No points, but good for Danny, I guess.
Yeah, it was his first Q3 appearance of the season. So
Yeah.
strong weekend for VCARB.
For Alpine, it was a no points weekend for them. Not much to report. We had Ocon P14, Gasly P16. They did have some surprising speed in quali. Having both cars get to Q2 was definitely probably the best they've done this season. But I was feeling really sad for Gasly when he got into when it was Q1. They were like, the highlight of Gasly's season is momentarily coming P4 in Q1 with 7 minutes still left to go. I was like, is this really the benchmark?
That's
Gasly's so much of a better driver than that, but I guess it just goes to show where they're at right now.
There was a really funny moment it was a clip from New Heights, the Kelsey brothers podcast. And Travis Kelsey, as we all know, is a big Alpine investor now and is involved in kind of the overall that sports investing group that went in together on Alpine. And he was at the Miami Grand Prix, which was the first points of the season with 1 point. And he was explaining this to his brother, Jason, on the podcast. And Jason was like, why are you celebrating 1 point? Isn't that bad? I'm confused. And Travis was like, no, this is exciting. This is our best result of the season. Like, we're on the up and up.
We'll take what we
not
can
bad,
get.
but not good.
For Stake, no points here either, sadly, with Joe in P15, Bottas in P18. And for Haas, though, the team from the energy from the team was extremely high after quali. Nico snuck in to get a P10 starting grid position. Hülkenberg has been doing amazing this season. Just
so good.
He is deserving that Audi contract. Sadly, that did not translate to points on Sunday. Nico just missed out on P10. I think it was Stroll that had a big overtake of him at one point. K-Mag finished P12, but tennis star Arna Sabalenka was in their garage. So that was very cool. We saw her play at the US Open last summer in New York.
Yeah, we did. I love the sports crossovers, especially with tennis.
It's the best.
Wasn't Yannick maybe Sinner was, I thought, in a garage or attending a race? He likes Formula One. Sinner likes Formula One, which is great.
Very cool. For Williams, it was a very tough race for Albon. So he pitted on lap 11 for hards, but then he came out of his pit stop going super slow. Team was very confused. Then he went on the radio and was like, you guys put the tire on wrong. So then he had to go back in for a second pit stop. And then to make matters worse, later on, he got a 10-second penalty for an unsafe release on what was his third pit stop. So in the end, they were just like, you can retire the car because he was many minutes behind everyone at this point. And in other news as well, in press conferences, I think it was on Friday, James Vowles did allude to what is going to be a very busy, silly season, and then did confirm that Logan is indeed at risk of losing his seat. And so at this point, it feels pretty inevitable. But to have James Vowles, the ever positive, optimistic man, really helping his drivers behind the scenes, it was kind of tough to hear.
Yeah, it is really tough. We'll see. I wonder if it'll be mid-season or they'll give him the full run, but I guess only time will tell. For standings, Max Verstappen 136, Checo 103, Charles Leclerc 98, Lando Norris 83, tied with Sainz at 83, and then it drops down, Oscar 41, et cetera, et cetera. And constructors, we have Red Bull at 239, Ferrari 187, McLaren 124, definitely inching up there, Mercedes 64, Aston Martin 42. We have 2 teams still with 0 points, Williams and Stake. So hopefully they'll get some points.
So jumping now to the Monaco preview, this needs no introduction. It is the most iconic race on the F1 calendar. It's definitely the race people have heard of, even if they have no idea what F1 is generally, if they're not F1 fans. And it's famous for being kind of the original star-studded glitzy event. A lot of spectators watch from yachts in the harbor and hotel balconies, which line the city circuit. A lot of drivers live in Monaco. Charles is there. So it's kind of a home race or an adopted home race for a lot of the grid, and it is infamously narrow and difficult to pass.
So it's a very, very short circuit. It's 3.3 kilometers, 78 laps, very twisty, lots of turns. Apparently, because there are so many twists and turns, drivers will make up to 5,000 gear changes, which is honestly insane. Think about how much they're doing. It's not super fast. The top speed is only 180. So I think it's a bit more of like a technical race. There's not that much speed going on, and there's only one DRS zone. Some fun facts about this race, just to show how sort of like tight and how important quality will be when it comes to actual race day, since there won't be that much passing. In 2003, the Grand Prix had 0 passes the entire race. So it was like just a straight line based on what everyone started on the grid. So it's very interesting. The race is definitely much more about the glitz, the glamour, driving along the Riviera and things like that. And it's been very criticized as of late because it's not really made for modern F1 cars in their sizes. In 2002, though, the race extended their contract to 2025. So it's here for this year and next year, and then we will see.
Yeah, super historic though. Built in 1929, the first F1 race was held at the circuit in 1950, and races have been held every year here since 1955, with the exception of COVID. So, not a lot of track changes either, except for in 2004 when they moved one of the kind of previously cramped pit sections to where the circuit swimming pool used to be. So, definitely a true original street circuit right through the heart of the city, and not like these modern purpose-built street circuits that aren't really street circuits. So Monaco is the real deal in terms of that. Whether you buy into street circuits or not, it is the OG.
And last year's race, though, was an example of how Monaco can be quite exciting. And I do quali here, I think, is one of the best qualies on the calendar. It's thrilling, and I think totally makes up for any sort of processional that may or may not happen during a race. But last year, the race was rainy. It really came down to pit stop strategy. It started with Max, Alonso, and Charles in the top 3. But Charles, in classic Monaco curse fashion, had a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Lando in quali. Ocon was a big story of the weekend here. The rain came on just as most of the drivers were heading in for their one and only planned stop, so strategy was really crucial. Only some of the track was damp, so Alonso pitted for mediums, but then had to go back in for inters, so bit of a botch of having to go in for the double stop. But despite that, he got Aston's best result of the season, got P2. Max went straight to inners, which was definitely the right call. That helped him get P1. And Ocon was able to hold off pressure from Hamilton and Sainz to get a P3. It was amazing. He was so happy. That was a really exciting one to see.
You've got to
So
love a
far from
surprise.
now.
Yeah, you got to love a surprise podium, especially at Monaco. So in terms of what we think about the teams and their race next weekend, so hopefully, of course, Checo can bounce back after what was pretty dismal showing at Imola, and they have some serious competition based on what we saw again at Imola. So lots for them to think about. And then for Ferrari, it's going to be a huge weekend for Charles. It's his Monaco home race. The car looks ready to perform, so hopefully the curse will be at bay and we'll let Charles do his thing.
That needs to be broken at some point.
Now's the
For
time.
Mercedes, not the best weekend at Imola. So I think the team will be looking to test out their upgrades once again at a very different track. Hopefully they'll translate to some stronger finishes this weekend. And for McLaren, just really excited to see hopefully a real Lando versus Oscar head to head. We were definitely robbed of that a bit with the grid penalty for Piastri, but they seem very close on pace, and it's going to be fun to watch these two. So hopefully their upgrades continue to shine. We'll see how they suit the Monaco track, but excited to see them keep charging the field.
For Aston Martin, like we said, Alonso had a great race here last year as one of the most experienced drivers. He's had a ton of experience in Monaco, but we'll see for Stroll if he can kind of pack on a second strong points weekend after points in Imola. For VCARB, we saw a lot of pace from them early on in the Imola weekend, even if it didn't translate to crazy results. Still, both cars in Q3, Danny's first Q3 appearance, knocking out Checo, and both Danny and Checo are Monaco Grand Prix winners. Danny in 2018, Checo 2 years ago. So that is another exciting component here. They're both great at this track.
For Alpine, I've said it once, I'll say it again, it's only up from here for them, and hopefully Ocon can pull something fun out of that hat here like he did for last year. For Stake, they had some minor upgrades in Imola, of course, did not translate to points, so I think it's also only up from here for them as well.
For Haas, energy continues to be strong. The team continues to flirt with points at almost every race weekend. So we'll see. Let's hope they continue to bring the energy, and Hulkenberg can continue to shine. I'm excited for him. With the announcement, after the announcement of him going to Audi, I feel like there's a lot more excitement around him as a driver and maybe some
Mr.
renewed
Saturday.
energy. So excited to see that continue. For Williams, like we were saying, off the back of Albon re-signing, really hope that they can continue to improve and show some good results. But what was interesting, so we know Albon is Thai. There are a lot of rumors this past week about F1's main target for expansion is actually another Asia race, and Thailand is
Ooh,
apparently the top of the list. So
wait.
that could be a home race for Albon, depending on when that gets put on the calendar. But I would love that.
Oh, we would go for sure opening year. That sounds so fun.
My family lived in Thailand for a few years, and I would absolutely love to go to that race. It would be
Ooh, I'm
incredible.
actually so excited this better happen. I'm going to
Yeah.
manifest it now. Okay, hot takes for Monaco. Don't hate me, Charles win.
Is that a jinx? Oh no.
No, you said it, not me.
I feel like it's unjinxable because like it's
The
such a
curse
curse.
is always so bad.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. You're right. We can say whatever we want.
Okay, well, I hope I'm not jinxing this, but I'm going to go with an Oscar Piastri win. It's time, baby.
That would be insane.
That would
McLaren
be
has the
beyond.
pace, and so does Oscar. So let's see it.
I am going to go with a two-part Danny Rick in the points, and I'm going to say Charles just on podium. I don't know if I want to say win, but would love to see him on the podium. He definitely deserves it. And again, don't want to jinx it, but Ferrari has been quite consistent on both performance and on strategy, which is what often has killed them in Monaco in the past, reliability or strategy or just pure bad luck. So we'll see. Fingers crossed.
And with that, thank you all for listening to our Imola Grand Prix recap, our preview for Monaco. We cannot wait. The European leg is basically in full swing now, or it's beginning. So we cannot wait. Talk soon.